All right, guys. So we're back today, and we're going to be taking a look at a few of the other things that really affected the colonists. Right, really moved them towards revolution, created that greater divide between them and Great Britain. The first one we're going to take a look at today, and what this video is all about, is the Quartering Act. This is a big one. This is huge. It gets passed in 1765, and just to set it up a little bit here, with the French and Indian War over, right, the colonists expected for all the troops to return to England, or at least the vast majority of troops to return to England. They thought that troop level would return back to what it had been maybe pre-war, right? Which is, of course, what you would expect, because in wars all over the world, whenever the war is won, whenever you're victorious, you don't keep troops in that area, or at least not the number of troops that you would need during wartime. So that was the expectation. Hooray, we won. We feel good about it. Now the troops can all go home. Well, what we're going to see is that troop presence really did not decrease. In fact, it began to increase. And so the colonists really began to ask themselves, well, why? Why are more coming, right? That's a little bit of an alarming thing, right? The war is over. We've won. We've managed ourselves for 150 years here with minimal interference from the government. And now all of a sudden there's an increasing presence at a time when conflict is decreasing. There's an increasing presence of British soldiers, right? So they're really a little bit concerned about that, as they should be. So they're told by the British that we're really there to protect you against the return of the French, right? The French had kind of been banished from North America. They lost all their land holdings there. And so they were telling the colonists, well, we're there because we want to protect our investment. We want to make sure that they don't come back. We're protecting you from the hostile return of the French. Well, I think we would have noticed if French ships had started coming. But this really was done. France wanted no more of war with Great Britain at that time. It was costly. They had already lost. And so that didn't really ring true. I mean, you get their justification. You kind of understand why they would believe that. But the reality is that for many of the colonists, they go, I don't know. I don't think I'm buying that. So the Crown says, well, it's really to help protect you against possible aggression from the Spanish. Because with the French departure, now all of the British lands kind of come in contact with Spanish lands. But the Spanish did not heavily populate those areas. They had shown no aggression, no idea that they might encroach upon British lands. So there was really no reason to think that the Spanish would have been hostile, that they would have been aggressive or somehow tried to take lands over. So that one didn't ring very true either, right? So we've got these two reasons that are being justified for the presence of the troops. Neither one of them really make all that much sense. The third one is really incredible because they say, well, it's to protect you from Native American hostilities. Now, the reason this one really doesn't ring true either is because the colonists are going, we've been begging for protection from Native American hostilities for decades and decades and decades. For 100 years, we've been asking for help in dealing with the Native American hostilities and all of these kinds of things. And you know what you sent? Nothing. We have had to form protections of our own. We've had to kind of take care of one another and those sorts of things. So why now, all of a sudden, are you so interested in protecting us from a threat that we've really kind of handled ourselves for so long? You weren't interested in it 5 years ago. You weren't interested in it 25 years ago. You weren't interested in it 50 years ago. Why now? Right? And so the people of the colonies, really, you can start to get a sense they have a little bit of an inherent distrust, of government, which I think is probably a healthy thing, right? That's not the wrong attitude to take. They're distrustful of government. They're distrustful of power. So what we're going to see is that the troops are really there. Now, there's what they were told: protect you against the French, protect you against the Spanish, protect you against the Native Americans. And then there's what the colonists really believed this was about. And they're probably a lot more accurate and closer to the truth. The troops were really there to enforce new laws and enact new taxes, right? So they're there to really on behalf of the crown to make sure that the crown has strong control over the colonies, to make sure that policies that are passed are being well enforced, to make sure that taxes that have been passed are being collected. So they're really there not for the benefit of the colonists, they're there for the benefit of the crown and parliament and money. They want to make sure that the colonists are obeying the laws, becoming more efficient, bringing money into the royal treasury. Now, we always have, but they believe we can bring more. They believe we can be more profitable, that they can squeeze more out of us. And these troops are going to be in our presence with that purpose in mind, to control the colonies and to tax the colonies, right? To collect the taxes. So that's why the troops are really there. Now, what does it look like, right? Because the Quartering Act basically means that any colonial landowner, anybody who owns a place in the colonies, must provide room and board to any British troop that needs to stay. So, I mean, that could be a pretty significant expense, right? You have your home, you're taking care of your family. There are some wealthier people on the coast in places like Boston and New York. And of course, they're going to get tapped, right? Somebody's going to knock on their door, and there's going to be troops that go, hey, we need a place to stay. And by virtue of the Quartering Act being passed, you must let us stay here. Now, that means that probably the wealthier homes almost universally had to quarter troops. Why wouldn't you stay there, right? If it's a nice home, probably a better quality of food, probably a lot more comfortable. So the higher you were in the pecking order, typically the first dibs you got on the nicer homes. If you were new to the British Army, you may have had to stay in some lower quality digs. They weren't building barracks to house these troops. They were forcing them on the colonial population. Now, that's one thing in the cities. It's another thing when you get out away from the cities into areas where people are living basically as subsistence farmers. They don't have the room, they don't have the food to give, and yet they're being forced to give it anyway. So this really is a significant added burden, a significant expense for many colonists. Now, play it through to its conclusion, right? Because not only are we seeing that a lot of these colonists are being uh, burdened by this, having to pay this higher expense, but it also means a significant loss of privacy, because the king's agents are now in your home. They are acting on government authority under orders of the king. They are in your midst. So they have access to who comes and goes from your home. They're going to hear snippets of conversations. They're going to, they are there with you all the time. And so this troubles a lot of the colonists because they're going, wait a minute, I may not agree with everything the king does. If I voice that opinion, is that somehow going to be held against me? Is that going to make its way back to higher authorities? And am I going to be seen as a troublemaker, a rebel, somebody who's disloyal to the crown? So the idea of having troops in your midst is one thing, but the idea of having troops in your midst that then stay in your home and can keep tabs on you, that's something else entirely. So the troops are also this constant reminder of the colonists' lack of power, lack of authority. They don't have the right to refuse. And it really is probably a harbinger of things to come. It foreshadows the fact that there's probably a lot more coming. Now, we've already seen the Proclamation of 1763. We've already seen the Sugar Act and the stamp tax. Those are significant enough. And these troops are here to enforce those. But with this many troops in the area, it seems likely that there's going to start to be more restrictions, that there's going to likely be more taxes. And so this is problematic for these folks. Now, there is a lot of anger over this, as you can well imagine, right? I don't want to have to open my home to anybody. This is my private property. This is what I've worked my entire life for. I shouldn't have to give it up. Or it's one thing, listen, I'm patriotic. I may choose to, but I don't want to have to. Anger over the Quartering Act was so strong that it's represented in our Bill of Rights. So you know that the founding fathers thought it was incredibly important. The very first one, right off the bat, is freedom of religion, freedom of press, freedom of assembly, and freedom of speech, right? And so they thought that was the most important thing. Right after that, you've got the Second Amendment, which is the right to bear arms, something that they thought really protected them against the government. But right after that, the very third one, now all 10 of them are important, right? In this Bill of Rights, we kind of hold those to be many of the more important amendments, the ones that we understand from the very beginning. But the third one is protection against being forced to quarter troops. That's how important, that's how angry they were, that's how much of an issue this was, that it's embedded in our very Constitution, right? In the first 10 amendments, it's right there. So, anyway, hopefully, it's difficult for us to put ourselves in the shoes of people who are having to do that, right? But the reality is, this was a very difficult thing for people economically. It was a very difficult thing for people to wrap their mind around the loss of privacy, what it meant for them being able, having the ability to share their true feelings and views and have conversations that may not always be favorable to the king or to Parliament or to the British military. And so this thing represents a significant problem for the colonist, and a significant rift is forming between us and our British overseers, our British rulers. So, anyway, with that said, we're going to move on here to the next couple of videos. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned a little bit. I hope you were able to sympathize with the colonists and what it meant for them to have troops in their midst. So go ahead, if you haven't done so already, please go ahead and subscribe. Makes it really easy for me to push the content out. You might learn a little something. I've got quite a few videos, and we're making more all the time. So join us on there, and I'll see you next time. Thanks, guys.